"You're coming with me," he said. The words were not a question, not an offer, but a statement of fact, like a stone placed at the center of a table. Something you couldn't move without consequence. The sun had just begun its descent, bleeding out across the horizon in long streaks of orange and rust. Dust hung in the air, shimmering like heat ghosts. It clung to my skin, my tongue, my mind. I'd forgotten what thirst felt like until he spoke. Then it rushed in like wildfire. Three men stood between us. Grayson men, my late husband's blood kin. They had arrived with a wagon, 2 horses, and a letter signed by a judge who never once looked me in the eye. In the span of 20 minutes, I was declared an encumbrance, not a person, a burden on assets. "You've no rights here," the eldest Grayson spat. He had a face carved out of something older than cruelty, tight as cured leather, pocked with old burns, and eyes like dull coins. He leaned on his cane like it was a scepter. "She's property owed to us. You're trespassing." I said nothing. I hadn't spoken since morning. Words were no longer currency in my world. They were debts I couldn't afford to repay. Abel didn't look at the old man. Not even once. His eyes were on me. Just me that I couldn't understand why. My dress was torn. My hair wild. I looked like something pulled from the ashes of a house fire. No shoes. No belongings. No ring. He stepped forward, slow but sure, until the shadow of his hat touched my toes. From the saddlebag slung over his shoulder, he pulled out a blanket, dark blue, thick, woolen. He didn't drape it over me like a savior in a dime novel. He just held it out, steady, offering warmth without pity. That my fingers moved before I could stop them. "You're not taking her," the youngest Grayson hissed, resting a hand on the butt of his revolver. I flinched. Abel didn't. "You pull that iron," Abel said. "You'd best have a second hand to reload it." It wasn't a threat. It was a weather report. The moment hung, tight as a pulled wire. No one moved. Not even the horses. Then the Grayson boy stepped back, muttering something about this not being over. But we all knew it was. For today. I took the blanket. Abel turned, walked to his horse, and waited. Didn't offer a hand. Didn't look back. Just waited like he already knew what I'd choose. And I did choose. I walked past the Graysons, past their wagon, past the broken law and the broken vows and the broken version of me they left behind. The blanket held around my shoulders like armor that we rode in silence, the hooves of his gelding beating out a steady rhythm against the dust. Behind us, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows like grasping hands across the land that I didn't know where we were going. I didn't ask. But, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like something to be owned. I felt stolen back. The road west curved like a question no one dared to ask. We didn't speak. The silence wasn't heavy. It was hollow, clean, like a field burned bare to chase the locusts off. I sat behind him on the horse, blanket wrapped tight, the smell of wool and leather mixing with dust and sweat and something that might have been cedar. The horizon stretched forever. I kept looking back, even though there was nothing behind me worth remembering. But still, part of me believed I might see them coming. A wagon, a flash of silver belt buckle, a rope. Abel said nothing the entire ride. His horse, a big gray with a notch in one ear, moved like it knew the trail by heart. When we reached the ridge, I saw his land. It wasn't much. A narrow valley pressed between low hills, a patch of green at the bottom fed by a thin trickle of creek. A weathered barn leaned into the wind like an old man listening to secrets. The house stood square and still, unadorned, unpainted, and utterly intact. 2 stories, for windows, a chimney coughing thin smoke. No flowers, no curtains, no lies. I hesitated. My throat dried. The moment he slid down from the saddle, I tensed. That old fear came rushing in. What now? What debt? What expectation? He tied the horse, stepped up to the porch, and opened the door like a man who lived alone but wasn't surprised to be followed. Inside was warm, plain, and full of the quiet kind of order you only get from solitude. A fire in the hearth, a kettle just beginning to hiss, shelves with neat rows of tools, not books, a rug faded from honest use, a single photograph on the mantel, a younger Abel, maybe, and a dark-haired woman with tired eyes that he motioned to the corner room. You'll sleep there. Food's in the kitchen, clothes in the chest. I nodded. Still said nothing. He turned toward the back door. I'll be tending the barn. And he left. Just like that. No questions. No warnings. No instructions. Just space. I in the chest were shirts too big, pants that needed a belt, and a thick pair of wool socks. I changed slowly, as if the act of putting on someone else's past might erase mine. The fabric smelled faintly of wood smoke and linseed oil. The first meal was a biscuit, cold beans, and a piece of dried apple. I ate like a woman who wasn't sure when the next one would come. Abel didn't return until the moon was high. I watched him from the dark window, expecting, I don't know, a knock, a demand, a key turning in a lock, but he didn't even glance toward the house. He just sat on the porch, boots on the step, hat in his lap, staring up at nothing. The house held. Still. No creaks. No footsteps. No doors closing softly behind my back. That night, I slept on a real bed. The mattress was thin, the quilt heavy, and the pillow too firm. I wept once. Silently. Just one breath that left my chest and didn't come back for a while. But I wasn't. Watched. And when I woke, the first thing I noticed wasn't fear. It was the smell of coffee. I did not leave the house for 4 days. The walls weren't thick, but they held something stronger than wood. Boundaries. Not bars. Not silence forced by fear, but silence allowed. A stillness that didn't watch or weigh or wait to punish. That was new. Abel came and went like clockwork. He didn't hover. Didn't ask how I was or what I needed. But things appeared. A bar of soap on the wash basin. A pair of worn gloves left near the back door. A chipped bowl filled with blackberries by the windowsill. Nothing wrapped in kindness. Nothing labeled as care. But it was that I moved through his home like a shadow wearing borrowed shoes. Light-footed. Quiet. I swept the floor once, unasked. Folded the blanket I had taken with me. Tried not to breathe too loud. On the 5th morning, I found the box. It was tucked behind the woodpile in the front room. Not hidden, not displayed. Just waiting. Small, cedar, carved with care, birds in flight across the lid, wings etched in delicate lines. The kind of thing someone makes when they're trying to remember something soft. I opened it. Inside was a black and white photograph. A woman, same as the one on the mantel, hair pinned high, face still but not cold. She wore a dress too plain for vanity and a necklace with a bird-shaped pendant. The photo was worn at the corners, like it had been held often, then tucked away. When it hurt too much, beside it, a broken teacup. Pale china, rimmed in blue, cracked clean through the center. Someone had wrapped the halves in cloth, like they couldn't bear to throw it out. I touched the porcelain like it might answer something. My hands trembled. I didn't know why at first, until I saw it, the pattern on the cup. It matched one my mother had owned, the last thing she gave me before she passed. I remembered the way it clinked against the saucer, the way her hands had trembled too. The day I left her house forever, I dropped it. It had shattered. I had never replaced it. I set the cup down gently, as if fixing it with touch alone. Later, I stood on the porch for the first time. Just stood. Let the sun touch my face. Let the wind lift strands of my hair like it knew me. The yard stretched before me, golden and wide. The hills cradled us like old hands. The sky didn't seem so indifferent. Abel was in the far field, mending fence. He didn't look up, and that was the gift that he didn't need to. I sat on the steps, watched him work. His movements were slow, patient, exact. I found comfort in the rhythm. The hammer tapping, the wires singing as it tightened. Not once did I feel exposed. I stayed outside for an hour. The next day, I swept the porch, brushed dust from the sill, took the berries he'd left, and placed them in a clean jar. Little things. But they were mine. No one asked me to be useful. No one expected me to be healed. But the choice to try, it felt like a kind of freedom I hadn't known even before the Graysons. I was still afraid, but I was also beginning. The rider came just after dawn, a silhouette against the eastern ridge. I saw him first from the porch, cup of coffee in hand, the warmth soaking into my palms. Abel was still in the barn. The figure stayed motionless, horse and man like one, thing carved out of suspicion and leather, too far to see his face. But I knew. Graysons watched before they moved. Always watching. Always testing. The calm before they coiled. I didn't say a word. I simply walked into the barn and set the coffee mug down on the edge of a barrel. Abel looked up from where he was checking a saddle cinch. I didn't have to explain. My stillness was enough that he didn't curse. Didn't ask. Just nodded once. Slow, like the earth itself had turned one click closer to something inevitable. The rest of the day moved like a dance no one had choreographed, but everyone knew the steps to. Abel cut wood. Not more than usual, but stacked it closer to the door. He cleaned the tack, checked the hinges on the barn doors, walked the perimeter fence with his rifle slung low and easy across his back. And no fuss. No panic. Just readiness. I watched from the window as he sat on the porch and field stripped the rifle. His hands moved like a man brushing crumbs from a table. Each click of metal against metal said more than any sermon that he didn't pace. He didn't post guards or set traps or yell about vengeance. That he cleaned his weapon, oiled the parts, reassembled it with the same deliberate patience he used to slice bread or mend a gate. That night, he cooked a real meal. Beans with onion and salt pork, cornbread thick enough to cut with a knife. He placed a plate in front of me without ceremony. We ate at the same table for the first time. Still no words, but the air between us was different now. Not soft, not strained, just steady. After dinner, I asked, "Did you know they'd come?" He didn't look up, just sipped his coffee. Anyone who takes something the Graysons want should assume they'll want it back. I stiffened, not at his words, at the way he said them. Like I was still a thing to be taken. He saw it. Set his cup down. Met my eyes. "You're not cargo," he said. "But they think you are. That's the problem." The fire cracked. The wind outside shifted. Somewhere in the hills, a coyote howled like it knew something we didn't. He stood and walked to the door. "I don't bluff, Lena. And I don't posture. I'll do what I have to." The rifle leaned against the frame. His hand rested on it. Not possessive. Just aware. I sat in the dark for a while after he left, the words circling in my head like hawks above a carcass. You're not cargo. 4 words. But they landed harder than any slap or sermon or vow. Later that night, I checked the locks. Not because I didn't feel safe, but because I was beginning to believe safety was something I could help protect, and that was new. The storm came in low, crawling across the hills like something feral and hungry. By noon, the sky turned the color of spoiled cream, and the air grew thick with the copper scent of coming rain. The animals felt it first, chickens silent, horses twitchy, the dog pacing tight circles near the shed like he knew what was about to unravel. Abel moved with purpose, but no haste, as always. He checked the barn latches, gathered ropes, set out lanterns. I followed him without being told. Not because I was told, but because I wanted to help. Then came the cry. A sheep's bleat, raw and desperate, sharper than wind or thunder. One of the ewes had wandered near the creek. When we got there, her legs trembled beneath her, and her body heaved in pain. A breech birth. Abel didn't curse. He knelt beside her, hands already working. Blood on the straw, rain in the wind. "Hold this," he said, handing me the lantern. It was the first time he'd given me something that mattered. I held it tight. The flame swayed, threatened to die with every gust, and I realized my whole body was shaking. I was barefoot, soaked, my dress clinging like a second skin, but I couldn't look away. The lamb wasn't coming right. Abel reached in. The ewe let out a cry that stabbed the sky. The storm answered with a thunderclap that rattled my ribs. "Keep the light steady." His voice was flat but urgent. I nodded, lips pressed so tight they bled. And then life. He pulled the lamb free, slick and silent. "Limp." "No," I whispered. Though no one could hear me over the wind, he rubbed its sides hard, muttered something too low for me to catch, then blew into its tiny nostrils. Again, again did I forgot the lantern, forgot the storm. Then, movement, the lamb twitched, coughed, let out the weakest, most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I gasped. Abel looked up at me for the first time all day. Rain streaked his face. His beard dripped like the barn eaves. He blinked once. "You kept the light," he said, and I laughed. A soft, choking thing like a sob wearing a smile. I set the lantern down, reached out to touch the lamb, but my hand paused. He saw it. "Go ahead." I did. Its fur was slick, warm, trembling. Like me. He picked up the lamb, handed it to me without ceremony. I cradled it against my chest like it was something sacred. On the way back, the wind eased. Inside, I wrapped the lamb in an old flour sack. Abel placed another log on the fire. Neither of us said anything for a while. Then I turned to him and said it. "Thank you." My voice cracked on the last syllable, like it wasn't used to being out in the air. He didn't respond, just nodded, but I saw something shift in his face. A softening at the corners, a crack in the armor. That night, I lit the lantern myself, not because I had to, because I wanted to be ready. The sky bruised purple, and the cattle wouldn't settle. They paced the fence line at dusk, their silhouettes jittering shadows in the dim light. The dog barked twice, then fell silent. Even the wind felt off, too still, like the world was holding its breath. Inside, the fire popped and spat, throwing amber light against the walls. Abel sat in his chair, boots off, cup of coffee cooling on the table beside him. He was watching me, not studying, not searching, just watching. I sat on the floor, knees drawn up, arms around them. I wasn't sure why I chose that spot, except it felt closer to the fire and farther from the past. "I loved him once," I said. The words startled both of us. Abel didn't interrupt. "Emery wasn't cruel. Not at first. He brought me wildflowers once. Taught me how to skin a rabbit without wasting the hide. Laughed when I tried to patch his shirts and stitch the sleeves shut." My eyes drifted to the window. Night pressed hard against the glass. But when he died, the Graysons looked at me like I was a debt they never agreed to pay. The old one, Raymond, he said I wasn't a wife. I was a lease. And the lease was up. Abel's jaw ticked. Just once. No words. But I saw it. A storm, quiet in the bones. "They dragged me out of our house," I said. "Didn't let me pack. Burned the quilts my mama made." I stood barefoot while they argued over who'd get the chickens and who'd get the gun. My voice cracked. And when I said I'd go to the sheriff, Raymond laughed. Said the sheriff had been bought and paid for since before I bled my first moon. Silence fell again, but it wasn't empty. Abel stood, crossed to the hearth, tossed a log on the fire like he was throwing a body on a pyre. Then, finally, he spoke. "They've come after things that didn't belong to them before." I looked up. His eyes were steel in the firelight. "What happened to them?" I asked. He didn't blink. "They left. Or they didn't." I swallowed hard. He turned and walked toward the back room, paused in the doorway. "I don't take people in, Lena. I never have. I know. But I take care of what's mine." Something twisted in my chest, part panic, part something older. I didn't want to be owned again. He saw it in my face. "I don't mean like that." Then, softer. "Not everything you keep is a possession. Sometimes it's just a promise you're not willing to break." That night, I slept with the window cracked open. The air smelled of wood smoke and distant rain. Somewhere out there, I knew the Graysons were planning, repositioning, waiting. But I wasn't alone anymore. The house no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt like a line in the sand, and I was on the right side of it. The storm hit the valley just before dawn, But they came anyway. Point three horses. 3 riders. Wet leather and thunder behind them. The Graysons didn't care about weather. They believed they were weather. I was on the porch, sweeping rainwater from the steps when I saw them crest the hill. I froze. The broom slid from my hand and landed with a dull thump. They rode in like they owned the dirt. Raymond in front, spine straight despite the rain soaking his coat. The younger one, Nathaniel, rode with rope coiled on his saddle horn. The third I didn't recognize. Didn't matter. They all wore the same face. Abel stepped out before I could call for him. Rifle resting against his shoulder, hat already dripping. He didn't posture, just stood with the calm of a man who'd already decided. Raymond dismounted with a grunt, boots squelching in the mud. He raised his voice over the wind. We've come for what's ours. Abel didn't move. She's not yours. Raymond smiled like a wolf with bad teeth. Law says different. Abel tilted his head slightly. Law ain't here. You gonna argue with a judge's seal, boy? He sneered, tossing a folded paper into the mud. Abel glanced at it, but didn't move. She's not a deed. She's not livestock. She's not returning. Nathaniel shifted in the saddle, hand brushing the rope. We don't need her whole, just her quiet. My legs went weak. I felt the porch boards tremble beneath me, but I didn't know if it was the wind or my bones. Raymond stepped forward, one hand raised like a preacher offering last rites. You give her up now, we don't burn the place. That's when Abel moved. That he didn't shout, didn't swing the rifle. He just stepped off the porch, walked to within 3 paces of Raymond, and stared through him. Rain slicked his beard. His coat billowed like wings caught mid-turn. Lightning cracked above us, and for one breathless second, the world froze. Then Abel spoke. Leave, he said, and don't come back. Raymond opened his mouth. Abel's fist closed it. One clean punch. Raymond dropped like a sack of grain. The other 2 reached for weapons. They never cleared leather. Abel leveled the rifle, not fired, just aimed. Nathaniel's hand froze. The third man raised his palms. Go. The rifle didn't waver. They obeyed. Raymond stirred, groaning. Nathaniel dragged him to his feet, spitting curses that died in the thunder. Abel stood still as stone until all 3 disappeared over the ridge, their silhouettes swallowed by storm and shame. When it was over, I exhaled. Didn't even know I'd been holding my breath. Abel turned, walked back to the porch. His eyes met mine, calm, sure, quiet as always. You all right? I nodded. Then, before I could stop myself, I reached for his hand. He let me. We stood like that, fingers barely touching, as the rain softened and the world began to turn again. Spring rolled into summer without ceremony. The hills softened under new grass. The creek sang louder, and the air smelled of mint and ironwood. No one came down the ridge again. The Graysons disappeared into silence, the kind that grows when men are too ashamed to admit defeat out loud. Abel and I never spoke of that morning. We didn't need to. Instead, we fell into a rhythm that didn't ask for definition. Shared chores, quiet coffee, the occasional shared glance when a hawk flew low or the lambs got loose again. But something shifted the day I found the broken teacup again. That I was dusting the shelf where he kept the carved box. For weeks I'd left it alone, afraid of trespassing on something not mine. But now, the dust had grown thick, the kind that asked for care. I lifted the cup with both hands, tracing the cracks like old scars. And I thought, maybe that's what we were. Something cracked, yes, but still able to hold warmth. I cleaned it, fitted the pieces back together. Not perfectly, some gaps remained, but I set it on the table anyway and filled it with Purple Creek flowers from the lower bend. They leaned like sleepy dancers, petals, catching the last golden hour. Abel saw it that evening. He paused. You fixed it? No, I said, but it holds. He nodded once. Then, something rare. He smiled. Not the polite twitch of lips, not the hard grin of a man proving something, but a real one. Slow, unearned, real. The next morning, he left a sprig of mint by the wash basin. Later, I found my boots cleaned and repaired, set neatly beside the door. When I looked up at the porch railing, a tiny whittled bird sat perched. Rough. Simple. Wings wide open. He never said it. But he was building something. So was I. One afternoon, I pointed at a hawk circling overhead. He glanced up, nodded, and said, "Good eye." That night, we cooked together. He chopped. I stirred. He burned the beans. I laughed for the first time in months. I wasn't healed, but I was mending. And so was the house. A curtain in the window. A rug moved slightly off-center, just how I liked it. A vase on the mantel. One night, I caught Abel adjusting it with a sheepish shrug. He wasn't used to softness. Neither was Ida. But we were learning. Why fall. The lamb, now nearly grown, followed me around like a pup. Abel joked he'd charge rent. I told him I was already paying, one fence post at a time. The past didn't vanish. It hung there, sometimes heavy, sometimes distant, but it didn't rule us anymore. That we made space for it on the shelf, next to the broken cup, the bird carvings, and the photograph no longer tucked away in a box. It was a house, now. Not just a place, and me. I wasn't a shadow. I was home.